Hello, and welcome to this episode of Claranet Cybersecurity TV, also known as CCS TV. My name is Alexi Bitskos, and I am a senior penetration tester with Claranet's SBU, also known as the Security Business Unit or SEC1. In this talk, I'll be continuing the OWASP Top 10 series, and I'll be talking about the A4 entry, which is known as XML External Entities or XXE. To briefly go over the agenda, I'll begin with what the OWASP Top 10 is. Then we'll jump into A4 XML external entities. Then we'll look at how to identify such vulnerabilities. And finally, look at some prevention and remediation steps. So I won't really go into what OWASP is. I believe there's another episode in the series which goes into much further detail. However, OWASP stands for the Open Web Application Security Project. They are a non-for-profit agency who attempts to provide guidance and resources to entities, companies, individuals who are looking to improve their overall cybersecurity posture throughout their cyber environments. So the OWASP Top 10 is a list of what they deem to be the most critical web application security risks. They update it every couple of years, and they like to call it an awareness document. So this is the list of the top 10 most critical vulnerabilities as they currently stand. And today we'll be looking at A4 XXE. So XML external entity injection attacks are vulnerabilities within XML processes in which threat actors introduce malicious XML content to perform arbitrary actions. These can result in, among others, RCE or remote code execution, file or information disclosure, as well as denial of service attacks. So looking at how to identify such vulnerabilities, it's relatively simple given how much of a niche kind of area it is. The first thing to look for is an application that processes untrusted XML. So that's XML that is provided by a user. This can be via file upload or direct input. So say you have a form where you want a user to add XML, an XML document or upload one. That's a good entry point. Or potentially they could also insert untrusted XML content into a page, documents, etc. And then a server-side component will then parse this XML content. This can include SOAP implementations, so with DTD processing enabled, especially earlier than version 1.2, as well as SAML authentication, which is used, as we know, for example, for single sign-on processes. So shown below is a sample payload to read the etc/password file. You essentially just have to define that there's a XML document, you define a doc type, you define an element. Within the element, you define what you want to do. So here we're running a system command to read the etc password file. And then finally, we output it within the element. And if the page or whatever it is that we're looking at is vulnerable, the contents of the password file will be output to the page. So looking at prevention and remediation, the first and probably most kind of valuable and secure way of doing it is avoid using XML and replace with a more modern technology such as JSON, for example. JSON comes with its own set of vulnerabilities. However, XML is generally pretty outdated, has a lot of overhead, etc. And complete removal of it and updating will completely remove this vulnerability category. Ensure that all of your XML processors are patched and upgraded regularly, as regularly as possible, and you're on the lookout for any vulnerabilities that may exist in your implemented ones. Update SOAP implementations past version 1.2, as these are known to be vulnerable. And finally, disable DTD and external entity processing. Looking at any further stages that we can take, you can implement server-side whitelisting or allow listing, as the NCSC has now said, for validation and sanitization. And this prevents dangerous content being passed to the XML processor. So as soon as the server-side allow list validator hits on a potentially dangerous payload, you'll say, hey, okay, I'm just going to reject this, send it to the user, and present them with an error. And it, as mentioned, it prevents dangerous content being passed to the processor. You can also implement a WAF or web application firewall solution. And although this doesn't resolve the underlying vulnerability, it will potentially identify and reject the request with a dangerous payload in it. So this is more of a issue of defense in depth rather than resolving the issue, but it is definitely something that can help. Thank you very much for the listening, and I hope you learned something from this talk.